welcome to another episode of Learning with Leibowitz. This episode is about how you actually write the text evidence in an ACEs response. So, when you're citing text evidence, you're using information from the story, from the text, from the book, from the article, from whatever you've read that proves your point and shows that your answer is correct. Without text evidence, you're simply sharing your opinion rather than showing an understanding of what you've read. So, once you've found your evidence in the text, you need to add it and incorporate it into your ACEs response. In doing this, there are rules that need to be followed when you write your evidence. So, you're going to take a look at some examples and see if you can determine the rules for punctuation based on the examples. If you need to pause the video in order to do this, go ahead, pause it, and see if you can figure out what the rules might be. So look at the similarities in the punctuation for these pieces of sample evidence. So one of the things that you may have noticed is that each piece of evidence is introduced by a sentence stem. And then when we look at the punctuation, you'll see that there's sentence stem, comma, space, quotation mark, then the quote, period, quotation mark, sentence stem, comma, space, quotation mark, period, quotation mark, and again, sentence stem, comma, space, quotation mark, period, quotation mark, and that pattern repeats for all of the samples. You may have also noticed that in some cases there is a transition before the sentence stem, and that when we have that, there's a comma after the transition. So the rules are pretty simple, and here they are summed up. These are the 4 main rules that you want to follow when including text evidence in your ACEs response. Be sure to follow all of them. Number 1, use quotation marks around the words that come from the text at both the beginning of the quote and the end of the quote. Quotation marks on each end of it. Number 2, after writing the sentence stem that introduces the text evidence, add a comma, followed by a space, and then quotation marks. Rule number 3, place a period inside the closing quotation marks. So the closing quotation marks are the ones that come at the end of the text evidence, and you want the period to go inside those quotation marks, like we saw right here, period, quotation mark. And last but not least, be sure that the quotation marks are touching the evidence, not the sentence stem. So just like when you look at the quotation marks around this word, there's no space between the quotation mark and the word. The same is true with your evidence. It's quotation mark and you go straight to your text evidence, no space. And at the end, period and no space, quotation mark. The only space comes between the sentence stem and the evidence itself. If you follow these 4 simple rules, that means you will write your evidence correctly in your response, and that will help your grade on your ACEs response for your sentence structure and your punctuation. Good luck!